What are the challenges for governments in the digital era?
Wow, that's a huge question you ask, actually, and we could be spending probably the whole of the day talking about that. There's many of them. But let me focus on maybe some of the fundamentals that I see. At a really fundamental level, I see the main challenge for governments is that, by and large, their operating model and capabilities were built for a totally different era. And although adjustments have been made to these over the years, to address the particular challenging environments that have been there, these have been, I would say, in the most incremental in nature. So I say this because when I look at, we as citizens lead our lives today, we live, work, communicate, play, etc., and businesses operate, all of this has radically transformed and actually subject to further, I would say, significant change. And our expectation needs, and not just have changed, but I would say made a complete paradigm shift, So it's the future generations that governments need to be making themselves ready for. And it's also at the same time not forgetting those generations that exist, today and the past generations. But in essence, we're talking about Generation Z and Generation Alpha. That must be the main focus. Now, when we look at that, the most important element is that digital requires governments to be operating in an online space. What does that mean? It means potentially, and also actually potentially the virtual space. And what that means is that they completely need to change the way in which they interact with its customers, its citizens, its businesses and other stakeholders. All of the transactions and all of the way they operate has to change significantly. Now, when we look at how governments have evolved over the last years, we don't see that fundamental shift has taken place. And this, in my opinion, requires them to build capabilities like being able to manage digital channels, digital services, strong digital marketing capabilities, and that's on the one hand, and then best-in-class technology skills and capabilities on the other. If we then look at how we today interact with governments and the way they deliver services, they are quite fragmented. The channels are fragmented, the services are fragmented, and the experience is fragmented. So that's the second element, I think, which is a big challenge for the digital era. And that means that as citizens, we have now become used to doing things in the online world, digitally communicating, buying, selling, ordering, paying, banking, etc. And if there is one thing that we have discovered during this pandemic that we are all going through, COVID-19, is the realization that online world plays a far greater role in our lives and could even become a more significant part of our day-to-day lives than it has been previously and how we had imagined. And governments, but not all, on the other hand, are much harder and inconvenient to deal with. It's one government, but at the same time, we have to remember dozens of brands. It's one government, but we have to access government through different channels. There are many channels to access government from. It's one government, but we can't fulfill our one need. For example, starting a business, we have to deal with different parts of the government. So that's the second element, I think, is a big challenge, where the way it's structured and delivering services is much more fragmented. And the third, and quite significant, is the legacy technology stack and practices. Governments have for many years, as we all know, invested heavily in building their technology stack, IT capabilities, practices, and it's sunk investment. This sunk investment actually is what makes it hard for governments to adopt and invest in radically new technologies and ways of working. Now, this comes in the way, in my opinion, to governments being able to operate in an online world that is the way the new generation and private sector organizations are really looking for governments to operate.